Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Saturday morning Bible study, and we're very grateful you would join us this holy Saturday. Today we are recording from the North Star Cottage. We are the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, and we welcome you all. And we will start with Thomas from New York, who is our moderator.
Welcome, everybody. So I'll start out with a hymn. Peace be to this congregation. Peace to every heart therein. Peace, the earnest of salvation. Peace, the fruit of conquered sin. Peace that speaks to heavenly giver. Peace to worldly minds unknown. Peace that floweth as a river from the eternal source alone. O thou God of peace, be near us. Fix within our hearts thy home. With thy bright appearing cheer us. In thy blessed freedom come. Come with all thy revelations. Truth, which we so long have sought, come with thy deep consolations. Peace of God, which passeth thought. This is Bethany by Charles Wesley. It's hymn 277 from the Christian Science Hymnal 1932 edition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I often use this hymn in preparation for our church services. It's just really gets my thought, praying for peace in the congregation. It's a beautiful hymn. I love this. But I did look up some words that I think are very helpful. And first of all, congregation, anywhere people are assembled. So even though we use anywhere we know that people are assembled, in government, judges, any place, schools, offices, everywhere, businesses. So we can apply it to those too, which is why I love this hymn so much. The other consolations, comforts, alleviation of misery or distress of mind, refreshment of and of spirits, a comparative degree of happiness in distress or misfortune, springing from any circumstance that abates the evil or supports and strengthens the mind as hope, joy, courage, and the like. So I love that definition. And my favorite line is, O thou God of peace, be near us, fix within our hearts thy home. I just love that. How it open everybody's heart to hear the truth, that God's presence is right there wherever the assembly is assembled, people are assembled, especially at our services. Fill their hearts with God's love and presence and peace.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to pray. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was that the definition of peace, did you say, that you gave us?
No, that was consolations.
Oh, consolations. Okay.
Consolations. And I did also look up Revelations, the disclosure or communication of truth to men by God himself. The sacred truths which God has communicated to man for his instruction and direction. This hymn really does cover a lot, but anyway.
It's beautiful.
Oh, it does very well. And for all the congregations that you mentioned, the source of peace that floweth as a river comes from one eternal source alone. So unless that congregation is looking to God for its peace, it's not going to find it.
Yeah.
It's only through love for one another that we can have that peace too.
That's right. Yeah, I love that. Those two sentences that Karen said too. O thou God of peace, be near us, fixed within our hearts thy home, to stay in the Father's house, fixed within it in our hearts. Carrie sent me two very interesting articles. One about Charles Wesley. Charles Wesley, 1707 to 1788, the hymn writer of Peace to Be to This Congregation, was an English poet and clergyman. He founded the Methodism in England, and during his lifetime, this is hard to believe, during his lifetime, he wrote more than 6,500 hymns.
Wow.
Oh my God.
His brother, John Wesley also.
Charles Wesley, the
There
author.
are two of them. I'm saying there's John Wesley also. He was his brother, I believe.
Well, this one is Charles.
Yeah.
And then 6 of his hymns are in our hymnal, and those are Christ whose glory fills the skies, hymn 35. Glory be to God on high, hymn 72 and 405. Help us to help each other, Lord, hymn 105. Partners of a glorious hope, hymn 273 and 274. Peace be to this congregation, hymn 276 and 277. And Soldiers of the Christ Arise, hymn 312. And then he also wrote Hark the Herald Angels Sing. So that's quite, and those are such, all beloved hymns from our hymnal. I love all of those.
Yeah.
And then she also sent an article called Peace by a 1923 journal by Warren O. Evans. And it says Christian Science is based upon the simple yet profound teachings of Christ Jesus. It begins with the faith of a little child and goes on to spiritual understanding, so that the Christian Scientist is as sure of himself in the working out of his life problem as he is when working in mathematics. To him, therefore, the study of Christian Science becomes most interesting and satisfying. Not only does he find himself in better health and less liable to sickness as a result, but the former yearnings of the human heart to know God and to understand human existence are satisfied. He catches a glimpse of what life really is and begins to realize God's presence with him every hour of the day, not through blind faith, but through practical, scientific, demonstrable understanding. He learns that life is not in matter and that man lives in divine mind, and he is at peace. Thus, he is able to appreciate the beauty of the following words, and then he quotes the hymn that Thomas picked out. And the definition of peace is a state of quiet or tranquility, freedom from disturbance or agitation. And it says the very fact that peace, real peace, has not as yet been attained by the human race, would clearly indicate that acquaintance with God has not sufficiently been cultivated. And then, Bruce, you can quote to us the Dominion Within about Christ Jesus.
Okay.
Because he often quotes this to us, and I love this.
This is by Henry Drummond. It's found in Dominion Within by Reverend Crasser, page 23, where Mr. Drummond says, Jesus' life, outwardly, was one of the most troubled lives that was ever lived. Tempest and tumult, tumult and tempest, the waves breaking over it all the time. But the inner life was a sea of glass. The great calm was always there. At any moment, you might have gone to him and found rest.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah,
So beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And that he's our exemplar, so can we be that way as well?
Yeah.
Sea of glass.
Yeah.
So thank you, Carrie, for those submissions. This was interesting.
I imagine Mr. Drummond may have had in mind the quote from the Bible where Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And he said this at a time when the weight of the world was weighing on him, and yet he was prepared to give rest that were heavy laden. Mrs. Eddy also says in Science and Health that man has an indissoluble connection with his maker. Obviously, Jesus knew that.
Thank you. And I loved in that article piece how Christian Science is like mathematics, and you build on it and you work with it. And sometimes it takes you a while to understand a certain principle or rule, just like it does in math. You just have to keep working on it, keep applying it. And then you say, oh, yeah, I get it. Oh, wow, that makes sense. I get that. And then you go up a step forward and go a little bit higher.
No matter what you seem to see around you sometimes, right? It's so important to hang in there.
Absolutely. The physical senses will not tell you what truly you're Father's house. So that was beautiful, Thomas. Thank you. Good way to start. Peace.
Well, one of the things that interested me in this hymn was that it was not written by a Christian Scientist, yet it's in the Christian Science hymnal. So I think about these things sometimes. I remember many years ago I went to a reading room and asked if they had the book by Henry Drummond, and they said, "Oh no, we can't sell that." You know. So this is just a way to illustrate that Plainfield Church isn't going to be so restrictive on what's authorized and what's not authorized. You know, and the evidence is right there in the hymnal.
Thank you, Tom. Because Mrs. Eddy never mentioned the word authorized when it came to literature.
Yeah.
It was interesting because recently David Keaston, who wrote the book The Healer, wrote us some guy from the organization, questioned if what some of his healings weren't authorized. They weren't from the Mary Baker Eddy Library or whatever. And his answer, and we're going to keep it recorded, he slammed that so hard. He said just the Mary Baker Eddy does not have a monopoly on all of this, that there are other sources, and that he has deeply, deeply checked all his sources that he received this information from. And he felt without a question it was true. It was very refreshing. Very refreshing.
Yeah, that Pharisee thought coming out.
The Pharisee thought coming out.
Mm-hmm. It's the same as when people question so much what Mr. Oakes has written in the Blue Book and so on.
Well, that's exactly right. And they do question that all the time. And yet we know how much he researched all that he wrote. They didn't just do this off the top of their heads. So, no, they do not have a monopoly. And if they would let this stuff out to all of us, that would be very nice as well. But they keep it in the archives.
They've had the time and resources to make all this free so everyone could freely check the factual accounts, and they've chosen not to. So they've taken themselves out of the equation. Too bad.
Yeah.
Well, Mrs. Eddy gave us, excuse me. Sorry.
No. Yeah, I was just going to say the rule here in Plainfield is inspiration, not whether something has been approved by some authoritative entity or something like that. It says right here that from the eternal source alone. Well, the eternal source is our source, and he speaks to us through inspiration.
Yeah, we know who the authoritative entity is, after all.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And, the stupid human mind which looks for material evidence of the authenticity of anything written or spoken, it is going to question everything that's in the Bible. For heaven's sake, and they do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Mrs. Eddy gave her followers credit for being able to figure out for themselves if what they're reading rings true. Is it truth? Does it sound like the truth to me? She gave us more credit for that. So,
Absolutely.
Yes, she implored us to do so.
I think he trusted us to God to lead us.
Exactly. And that makes all the difference. And that's true. You have to look for that in government too. Do they trust you to make intelligent decisions, or do they have to?
Or do they assume you're stupid and they need to tell you what?
Right. I often think of the reference to sturdy pioneer in the preface of the Science and Hell, that Mary Baker Eddy is kind of putting it on us to forge the path on our own. And if we limit ourselves just to authorized texts, then we're not really leaving ourselves open for direct inspiration from God.
Thank you. The divinity course, as Carpenter called it.
Yeah, and really, both Jesus and Mrs. Eddy continually implored their disciples and their students to not lean on them personally, but rather to go to God and to recognize that God is doing the work through them, of course, but God is doing the work. And Mrs. Eddy even said of herself, "Follow me only insofar as I follow the Christ."
And we should probably
Yeah.
Okay. So I do want to add one more thing on this, is that this is a learning process for me. I actually was not familiar with this hymn. I was just looking for a quote, and when I found this, I said, "Oh, I really love this." And so I forget the name, but the first speaker who said that they read this and prepare for this each Sunday. I mean, that's awesome. So
yeah, it is. It's be a good watch message.
So our topic today is, of course, peace be with you. Now, before we get started, I'm just going to run through, just not very long, a few seconds, but, this is Holy Week, and so this is kind of what our Bible discussion is based on. So I'm just going to run through what Holy Week is. It's other churches, they spend a lot of time on these events, and we don't really spend that much time. But, Palm Sunday is the triumphal entry. Holy Monday was the temple cleansing. Holy Tuesday was the temple debates and the Olivet Discourse. Spy or Silent Wednesday was the day that we don't know what happened, but some people think it was the day that Judas agreed to betray Jesus. Maundy Thursday, which is the focus of one of our questions, is when Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. And then Thursday night on Maundy Thursday, that's when he was arrested. Good Friday, that's when he's being tried and was being condemned. Judas hanged himself. And then later he was crucified and died. And then Joseph of Arimathea placed his body in the tomb. So on Holy Saturday, the Roman soldiers guarded the tomb. So this is the Sabbath, right? And when the Sabbath was over, which means, I guess, when sundown, Mary Magdalene and others, they went and bought and prepared spices to anoint the body of Jesus. And then Easter Sunday is when Mary Magdalene and others went to go anoint Jesus' body in the tomb and found that it was empty. And then there are a number of incidents where Jesus met with people. in that. So that kind of wraps up the events very quickly for Holy Week.
Quite a week.
Yeah, thank you very much. Because we don't always think about all those things.
And
Okay, so our first, go ahead.
No. I was going to say, I mean, a lot of things, strange things. You know, there was this huge earthquake in Egypt that scared the living daylights out of everybody. Mm-hmm. And the temple, you know, was rent. A crack in the temple. A lot of strange things happened.
And not only was the tomb empty, it had been opened after it had been sealed.
Okay.
Okay, so I picked 3 events from Holy Week for us to discuss. We'll see what we'll get through today. But the first question is on Maundy, Thursday. So it was on Tuesday at Bethany. A woman anointed Jesus, and the disciples rebuked her for that. And then on Thursday, Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, and initially Peter objected. So the question is, what was the reason Jesus washed the feet of the disciples?
Well, Jesus, everything he said and did had meaning. Everything. Back then, as now. So as I was preparing for this Bible study, I was making sure that, what does all this mean for today as well as back then. So the most important thing that I felt, what he was telling by his example, that's how he taught, by example, not only by words, but by his example, was he was teaching that the lesson of humility and service, and that they called him master and rabbi, but he didn't want to be elevated to any other. He wanted them to see that he was just as, he was also a servant to God. He was a witness to God, a servant to God. And so he was teaching his disciples that they were to serve each other and mankind, that no one was the greatest. When James and John, beautifully portrayed in The Chosen, but James and John came to him and wanted to be seated at the right hand, left hand of Jesus. And you could see in his face the disappointment that they missed the whole, the whole point about why they were there was to serve. That's what he was teaching them, how to serve mankind. When I'm not here, you're to carry on the work, and there's nobody who's going to be greater than the other. And that's why when Peter said, I wouldn't want to wash your feet. He said, well, if I don't wash your feet, you're not a part of this whole lesson that we're all to serve God and mankind. And so that was, I think, one of the major lessons for that example was service and love for mankind.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And both you and Carrie sent me that article, I Serve, by and it is beautiful. We should put it on the carousel. Okay. It starts with the ancient motto, Ich dien, I serve, which is attached to the crest of the Prince of Wales, deserves to be adopted by all practical Christians. For one of the unfailing signs of moral regeneration in human nature is the desire to serve. But the longing to serve can only proceed from noble aspirations, deep-seated love, and genuine tender-heartedness. And then this, the desire to serve bursts the shell of selfishness, lifts the burden of belief which would impose upon mankind a weighty sense of cannot, and cut short the tendency in human nature to fatten on the words and works of others without contributing to the common weal, which is well-being. Service makes doers and not merely preachers of the word, and stamps Christianity as practical and immediately available. The union of noble leadership and unremitting service is beautifully illustrated in our own day by the life of the discoverer and founder of Christian Science, which bids scientists follow their leader only, as Gary just quoted, only so far as she follows the Christ. This is so important, and in the practice, I can tell who really gets it, who's really been healed by their desire to serve. Certainly by giving their testimony. I mean, if they don't even want to do that, it's an indication of something. I mean, this slams it. It bursts you out of your sense of selfishness. And, this is something that Mrs. Evans did establish, as we've talked about here in times past. My goodness, I was scared to death. I thought I would never give a testimony. Luann would say that too. No way I'm going to testify. I'll do anything, but I'm not testifying. And she would say, if you're grateful, you will testify. And if you're grateful, you'll serve. And in whatever way. And maybe you serve quietly wherever you live. I'm not questioning how people serve, but it should be a result of coming upon Christian Science and starting your healing process, this giving back. I love it. He really lays it out. The desire to serve bursts the shell of selfishness.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful.
I think it's when you.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying that I think it's when you take your thought off of self and what you've received from science, you want to share it, bless somebody else. That's when that fear, so-called fear, goes away. Or you're not thinking about what you're going to get, but what you go to give to others, a life of giving. That's what Jesus did. So.
Thank you.
Yes, to be a blessing, to make that your identity, actually be a blessing.
Yes.
That's what I see in Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. I mean, as someone said earlier, that's an example. That was kind of the ultimate example that I think of when I think about Jesus' life.
Thank you.
What it brings me to.
Wait a sec. Let me just put you louder. Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, I just have to. Okay, go ahead. Whoops. Oh, shoot. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Mary?
Yes.
Yeah, what it brings me to is giving in the service of our Maker. Does not impoverish, neither does withholding enrich.
Thank you, Zeri. Science and Health.
Yes, from the Science and Health, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this lesson that Jesus was giving them requires that if anybody's really going to serve successfully, serve in God's service, serve mankind, they really have to be willing to burn out the pride that is in them. And this is a process that a lot of people, I'll say, I haven't found anybody that enjoys having the pride burned out of them. Because it hurts to have pride burned out of you. But it's necessary. It's the cleansing. I mean, the other, when Jesus told Peter that, if you don't allow me to do this, you don't have any part in us, or you don't have any part in me. In other words, what he was telling Peter was, you need this mental cleansing. You need to have pride burned out of you. Because Jesus had no pride. And that was, that was one of the key distinguishing characteristics of him, and how he was able to do what he did. He had no pride whatsoever.
And the contrary, the humility.
Definitely.
Purification from all self. Purification from all self.
Sari?
I was agreeing about humility, because without humility, we don't go further. We overcome the sense of pride when we are humble and we say, Father, Mother God, what should we do? Think of the woman who was in the concentration camp. She had to become humble enough to see that God was her life. And she said, God, what should I do? And she survived. And I think that is a message for all of us. Father, Mother God, what should we do to go forward in your way?
Thank you.
Also, like God said about having your pride bossed out. I agree with that. And also, when Jesus was washing his disciples' feet, that was the most humble thing to do. And I think that was why Peter was trying to object, not because he doesn't want his feet to be washed, but he felt like, I'm the one who's supposed to be washing your feet. And here you are washing my feet. And he doesn't feel comfortable doing that. But if you read that chapter all the way down, you see where Christ was also at the same time warning them. Something like, because I'm washing your feet doesn't mean that you are greater than me. I think that part is very, very important. He's still letting them know you have to be humble. You have to show your leadership by example, by being a servant to the people that you are leading, but at the same time, you're not greater than your master. As I am not greater than the one who sent me, which is God. But at the same time, we also still have to show our Christianity, our Christian life, our commitment to God by serving others.
Good point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, in the article Oneness that Thomas sent us, these wonderful articles along with part of our, Bignell Young says he washed away the belief that they were human beings. We must do this with our friends.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Your personality.
Yeah. Yep, get rid of the personality.
It's also said that in wealthy homes, this washing feet was done by servants, a slave, or the wife, of course. And so it's a lower, people looking at it in that time as a lower job by someone lower in the home. So when Jesus does that, it means a lot. A great example.
Thank you. Yes, it's the lowliest of serving. One of the lowliest ways to serve.
Sorry. Mrs. Sadie, I think as I'm still learning, all of us, about the life of Mrs. Sadie. But personally, what I felt about her, she really tried the best she could to not let people replace her as God. And every opportunity, because people really, really, you can tell how they really want to, because of who they believe worship she is. Yeah, worship her, and she saw that in them, and every opportunity she tried to have them focus on God instead on her. And I think I was reading something where she advised them to put a picture, I think it was a picture of the woman with, was it a lamp or something? She asked them to put it somewhere in the mother's church extension. after a few days, she told them to remove it. And she asked the directors to remove it immediately because I think she got the message that people will be seeing her that way as well. And she told them straight that nobody should be worshiping me. We should be putting focus on God.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was the statue of the child, the student, whatever it was.
Right.
And what you're saying is right. You know, people are going to look at a statue or an image of something and say, "Oh, this is great." Well, the thing that's great is our Father, Mother, God, and the fact that He communicates with us and guides our life is our life. That's the thing that's most important.
Yeah, you can see how, that explains how humble she is.
Yes. I remember Mrs. Evans telling us when she left science as a young woman, kind of to have fun, she thought. And then she got a very serious problem. And she really got on her knees and said, "Dear Father, I'll do anything. I will wash the bathrooms of your church, whatever." But just the idea of that total submission and doing whatever. And she did whatever for a long time before she became a practitioner and an unauthorized teacher. And us here in Plainfield have done the lowliest of jobs. I mean, I know I've washed the bathrooms of the church for a long time, done all kinds of ways to serve God, and didn't ever question it, and loved it. Whatever you're asked to do, there's nothing more important or less important. Is there really? Living stones, we each in our place, let us be worthy such a grace.
And I'm thinking a lot through this. In The Chosen, Jesus said to Simon the Zealot, I just ask that you recognize the nature of my mission. And he kept trying to get people to recognize that, and even through this, and it's not about glory, not about whatever they thought it was. So.
Yeah, you can really see, as Karen said, was it Karen? But anyway, that Big James and John, when they wanted, and the mother wanting to promote that from the right side of Jesus, how to see it that way is so terribly obnoxious. The mother too, and that's what desired. So any feeling like that of ambition or wanting to be something must be put out.
It also addresses the issue of superiority and inferiority, which God sees none of that.
Yes, thank you.
So I have to learn to be faithful in the little things first.
Yes, faithful in the little things, and then when you're fit, you will be promoted. And I was reading again someone saying how their life experience just had prepared them for what they were doing now. And never complain where you are at this point. God will raise you or lift you up when you've proven faithful. And to try to do it yourself is human will, and it will come to naught.
It'll fall on your face.
It will come crashing down.
Crashing
down.
Yeah, I always feel comfortable when I hear anybody wants to be a reader or a practitioner, any of those things. It makes me very uncomfortable. We were taught here, you don't get into the practice gets into you. And that's true of everything else. God is the promoter. Just as God promoted David to King David when he was proved faithful. Didn't even kill Saul when he had many opportunities, and Saul was out to kill him.
Yeah, maybe when you were talking about cleaning and mopping, it just, I couldn't help it, but it just bring back the memory. I was sharing this with Nancy the other way we were driving. I was driving her back to her home. One of the things that struck me, I think it was one of the main reasons why I decided to stay here when the offer was given to me. When I came here for the first time in my life, I saw people actually fully dedicated their life to the service of God. I mean, I never seen anything like that before. What I've seen I grew up all my life in the church family, everything about church and the rest of that. But I haven't actually seen that in action. Like you in particular and a lot of other church members, like on Saturday, going to Mrs. Evans' house, talking about cleaning and mopping. I mean,
a lot of cleaning and mopping, I'll tell you.
That house. It was the cleanest house I've ever seen in my life. And really, if going to that house, the dining room is like crystal. I mean, every inch of that house is purely clean. And it wasn't done by anybody from outside. It was done by members of this church. And people cleaning, painting, you name it. Everything was done by members of this church. And it really, really inspired me. I was sharing this with Nancy. I was like, and when Ms. Evans asked me if I want to stay here, I was like, who am I? I mean, watching these people giving their lives to God, I mean, I have no reason not to do it. It really, really inspired me. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to stay, because I really love what I saw.
Thank you. I never heard that story. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It is beautiful. Yeah. I mean, you don't know what maybe your example is doing, but it might scare some people away. But it didn't scare you.
Well, if they're not ready.
And they're not ready, no. Well, you take that across.
So one of my favorite hymns in regards to I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please.
There's a hymn, 137 is one of my favorite hymns now. And it ends, I need thee every hour. Teach me thy will, and thy rich promise, Lord, in me fulfill. That whole hymn is one of my favorites, but I love that.
Thank you. Yes. And when I would be cleaning, whether it was in Mrs. Evans or the church, I kept this notebook, and that was one of the hymns I had in that notebook. And if I was ever feeling tired or discouraged or whatever, I still have that notebook. I would go back and I would read those hymns or things I wrote, and just to encourage me in this work. So it was always a holy time. It was never doing menial tasks. It was always a holy time. And I grew tremendously. And frankly, I didn't know how to do a lot of that healing and cooking and other things I learned. I learned a tremendous amount, which I'm grateful for, as did so many others, everybody here. Bruce kept all the church houses, fixing the roofs, painting every weekend. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, so we did talk about Jesus being humble, right, when he's washing their feet. But one person brought up that article by Dicknell Young. He was going through a process of spiritual cleansing, right? We know Jesus healed people of disease and sin. And in a certain sense, he was preparing the disciples for the challenges in the future. Mm-hmm. Tell them to, wash away materiality, because he wasn't going to be with them. They had to stand on their own 2 feet. And so he was preparing them. Anyway, so I think he was kind of like showing them the path to how to become holy.
Most definitely he did.
Yeah.
And also, if anyone wonders, we were never paid for any of this work. Never a penny. No.
Okay, so maybe we can talk about the second question. So this is Pilate. On Friday morning, Jesus was taken to Pilate. Jesus was accused of stirring up the people. That's in Luke chapter 23, verse 5. And it also mentions that the chief priest stirred up the crowd. So that's Mark chapter 15, verse 11. So what is this stirring up? And did Jesus stir up the people?
I looked up the word stir. I love to look words up. So I looked up the word stir, and to disturb, agitate, to incite to action, to instigate, to put into motion, to instigate by inflaming passions. And that's certainly what his teaching and example did. Mrs. Eddy said, if he hadn't healed anybody, everything would have been fine. But the minute he started healing the elders in the church, it was a rebuke to them. And they started feeling it. And the more the crowds came, the more healing he did, the more proofs he was proving of what he understood about God. The hatred and the agitation, it just grew and grew and grew until they couldn't stand it anymore, and they had to do something about it. So he says, he was known as the Prince of Peace, but he says himself, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. And the sword of truth is the gospel that he taught, was certainly stirring things up.
Yeah, I think there are two stirrings here that you've mentioned. The one stirring was Jesus healed and preached, and he caused people to recognize that there was a power of God that was higher than what they were getting from their own chief priest. Well, and it was, and publicly, Jesus was also rebuking the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was causing the people to recognize that the Pharisees and the Sadducees didn't have it all together. And it was a huge threat to them.
Yeah.
They were feeling the stirring of the people as a result of Jesus fulfilling his mission.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the crowd that insisted that Pilate crucify Jesus. That was the other stirring. And that was the result. This is when a lot of people from outside Jerusalem had come to Jerusalem for the Passover.
Mm-hmm.
And the chief priests paid people to riot. They hired people who had come.
Oh.
They hired people to riot. Similar to what has happened around the world recently and in our own country. But the evil forces, in this case, the chief priests and the Sadducees, hired people to riot. So I think it's important to distinguish between these two, and you brought it up, Tom. There was a stirring of the people, and it was a threat to the chief priests and the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And then there was a riot that insisted that Jesus be crucified, and that was a totally different situation.
And the only reason what Jesus did was a threat to the Pharisees was because they wanted to retain their human positions. They, if they truly were men of God, they would have gladly followed him.
It exposed them, yes. It exposed them. And, you think today, and I remember speaking about it, if Christian Science was thoroughly practiced, it would do away with what? Do away with the government. It would do away with materia medica, right? It would do away with all these ancient systems. And it stirs the people. Christian Science has stirred the people, indeed. It's sort of fallen a little latent these days, but wherever it's truly practiced, it stirs the people, as it did with our church, with the healing work that Mrs. Evans did. You think they'd be happy for it? No. Mm-mm.
No, the chief priests
and the organization
were threatened by the pure of the Christian Science that was being practiced.
Envy, jealousy, all of that.
All of that.
Most definitely.
Yep.
Most definitely. That was it. People want to know, how did this happen? That's how it happened. Thank you. Envy, jealousy, being reported to the board of directors, and not even having a fair trial. Mrs. Evans did not. And then she was already signed, sealed, and delivered. But that's so much good came of that. We had a resurrection. Certainly the watching came of that, and many, many, many other things. All this so-called unauthorized literature came of that, and also just a tremendous deeper understanding. So I've called it Boot Camp for Christian Scientists.
And it's a laughable concept that anyone would have the power to excommunicate or kick someone outside of church when we know that church is the structure of truth and love. How can you kick someone outside of it? That's ridiculous.
Yes, and then that they kicked out. So many excommunicated at that time. They went on a rampage.
So you take the church with you, like Eustace did.
Well,
probably one of the reasons why Mrs. Eddy didn't want to start churches.
Well, it definitely
a church. She
is.
Wanted people to read the book and just start demonstrating what was in the book and stop forming churches, because she could foresee what they were stepping into when they started that.
Very, very much so.
And even Jesus was not trying to start a human organization.
Yeah, Jesus never started.
No,
that's what he told the woman at the well.
Mm-hmm. It shows the purpose of those estoppel clauses in the manual.
Thank you. That's just what I was going to say. Estoppel clauses would have dismantled the big organization.
Yeah.
I would also, there was somewhat of a division in with the Pharisees even. Take a look at Nicodemus, who actually recognized the Christ, and some of the others who did as well.
Thank you.
And they had to contend with these people who didn't have a high enough understanding and were threatened by it.
Yes.
No, that's exactly right. There were a lot of really good, receptive people, even in the organization at the time.
And they still are. It's only the malicious element, and there's a malicious element, as there was in those times. And that malicious element will destroy itself because it's error. And Mrs. Eddy says that I'm not, this isn't my opinion. All it can do is destroy itself.
Yeah, that's kind of important. So that's one of the reasons I picked this question, because error can, like, scream really loudly, right, and seem very real and scare us, right?
That's what it wants to do.
Yeah.
And that's what it did with Pilate. Oh, go ahead.
Right.
I'm done. So.
Jesus was not impressed by the crowd. And we don't need to be impressed when error screams. And Mrs. Eddy says, we give it all the power it has, right?
Yes. Jesus could see through the illusion of the power's strength against him. It's just like
I read. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, just like the statement that once a lie is seen as a lie, it ceases to have any power or even being. So seeing through an illusion just ends it.
It's to see the nothingness and the powerlessness of it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting to me too how the Romans seemed to see it more clearly than the Jews. They kept Pilate, and I wash my hands. I don't see anything wrong with this person. They
Jesus. Yeah, he wasn't a threat to them.
No, that's right. A threat to them.
Right.
Even though the chief priests made up the lie that he was a threat to them.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
They were trying to get the support of the Romans to crucify the guy by lying to them.
Yes, and that made them all more angry when they heard Pilate say, you know, I don't want to crucify him. I'll just talk to him and let him go. And that stirred them up even more. Their hatred became more intense.
Yeah.
And they even accused Pilate of conspiring with Jesus against them. I mean, the chief priests didn't like Pilate.
But again, you know, this isn't the Jews or a race or anything. This is just animal magnetism. Always remember, it's a person, and that's true of the organization too. And when I speak, sometimes people, oh my goodness, you're not being loving. It's not about people. It's about animal magnetism. And who's telling of the foe and ambush? If I don't say these things, it's already been kept secret for so many years. Well, it's not secret anymore. None of this. It's out in the open. Thank God.
And if you find yourself acting like a Pharisee, try to recognize that. Do something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I reread Atonement and Eucharist for this Bible study too, and there were a couple of places that stood out. Said Herod and Pilate laid aside old feuds in order to unite in putting to shame and death the best man that ever trod the globe. Today, as of old, error and evil again make common cause against the exponents of truth. And then on page 53, she says, the world could not interpret aright the discomfort which Jesus inspired and the spiritual blessings which might flow from such discomfort.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Very, very true. Science and health.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we squeeze in the third question.
Yes, we should.
Okay, so Mary Magdalene. All right, so we know Jesus healed Mary Magdalene. We know Mary Magdalene was at the crucifixion. We know Mary Magdalene watched as the body of Jesus was placed in the tomb. And we know that she went home and she prepared spices and perfumes to anoint his body later, right? So, on Easter Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome went to anoint the body of Jesus and found the tomb empty. Mary Magdalene wept. And then Jesus appeared. So the question is, why did Jesus first appear to Mary Magdalene?
I think she had shown
first of all, go ahead, Florence.
No, I feel that Mary Magdalene had shown the most immense love for the Christ and her own contrition, as well as her gratitude for what Jesus did. And this led to a steadfast loyalty all the way. You see Mary Magdalene with Jesus up until the crucifixion and afterwards. So it's not surprising that Jesus would appear to her first.
Thank you.
She was the most receptive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All of Jesus'
Well, it sounds like the opposite of doubting Thomas, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't we, this is interesting, like was on Sunday when Jesus met with the disciples, who was not there? Was Thomas.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting what you said about being receptive.
I also, Mrs. Eddy, all the disciples at his most hour of need all deserted him, except Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very important. And now there's another really beautiful article that Karen sent, a story of gratitude, which is the story of Mary Magdalene. should be put on the carousel. And it's by Reverend Irving Tomlinson, who faithfully served Mrs. Eddy. So he understood this principle faithfully, and he never backed down. He always did the right thing. He always stood by her. He wrote that book, 12 Years with Mary Baker Eddy, which now you can't get, but as Thomas has told us, but it's a wonderful biography of her. And he writes in that article, we know that our success or failure for the time being depends upon our stand in the hour of trial. What are we going to do when really put to it? And she stood. After being healed and the 7 demons cast out, which was a tremendous healing, as we've seen in The Chosen, she served right away, ministered, and throughout this she served. Even when she probably thought her master had passed on, she brought oil and other things to the gravesite. She always served and was obedient to whatever he told her to do. And in that trial, that awful hour of trial, she remained faithful. Her love remained faithful. And I love what was read, Wednesday night from Miscellany. To the woman at the sepulchre, bowed in strong affection's anguish. One word, Mary, broke the gloom with Christ's all-conquering love. That
explains it.
Yes, bowed in strong affection's anguish. They never left his side. They never doubted his work. She never did. And that is why he appeared to her. And some of these things I read, it implied, the disciples couldn't see a lot of these things because their eyes were holden. They were too materialistic. They doubted too much, but not Mary.
Mm-hmm.
They believed her. I know they didn't even believe her.
But you went back.
Yes.
Yes.
Then they finally
down my unbelief.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting about Thomas.
Many of them were so afraid that they couldn't come out.
Yeah,
because
that's
they were
true.
afraid of what the Jews would do to them. They thought they were going to get arrested.
Yeah, they were afraid.
Yeah, and this woman, she wasn't. She was asking, when she saw the angel, she asked, where did you keep my Lord? Did you take him?
Tell me where he is. He's him.
Some of us on movie night, we watched the movie called Risen, and it brings out a lot of these things. It's very graphic in the beginning for those tender hearts who don't want to see about the crucifixion. Some of it's very graphic in the beginning, particularly, but it's about a Roman soldier, and he helped crucify Jesus, and then he was asked by the Pilate, to find out where is he, what's happened. I want to know if he's alive or not. What is going on? Was he stolen? And so you follow this Roman's agonizing, in a way, footsteps. He's interviewing people. He's trying to figure out where the heck is Jesus and what happened to him. And finally, it is so incredible at the ending, right? Wow. When he sees Jesus, he sees the person he crucified on the cross. And how it just totally changed him in his world. The ending is worth all the sort of...
Yeah, he comes into that room where Jesus is, and, he's full of human strength, and then he just drops his sword.
Yeah.
He just can't believe it.
And he changes his whole way, and he ends up protecting the disciples and seeing Jesus' ascension. And I think it was... I like to watch it at Easter. It is graphic in the beginning for those of you who don't like to see crucifixion. But the story is amazing. And who knows, could be true. They wanted to know. There were all these interviews going on. The Romans, they wanted to know what the heck was happening.
Yeah, really, what did you Jews bring to us?
Yes. Yeah, and just in an objective way. And tomorrow we're probably going to be reading from this... like a book or articles. It supposedly started
historic
with
accounts.
Historic accounts. starting with the Sanhedrin that was passed down, accounts of what happened. Some of it I haven't read all of it. Some of it I didn't care for. It was too humanizing. But the one of, what was the account of?
Pilate was very good.
Pilate.
Yeah, it was a report that Pilate wrote to Caesar after the crucifixion and the resurrection, trying to explain as best he could what actually happened, because Pilate was being accused by Herod and the chief priests of doing a horrible job in conspiring against the Jews and all that sort of stuff. And Pilate needed to defend himself with Caesar. So he wrote this account of what happened. And it's very instructive.
It is. And of course it's called unauthorized. No, it's not true. And all this stuff. So judge for yourselves.
Yeah.
Not true. Yeah, garbage, never happened, never was. But to me, it
makes sense.
It does make sense. And why wouldn't the Jews? They passed down a lot of history that some of us are not familiar with. And they were
good record keepers.
Good record keepers, yes.
And don't forget, there are millions and millions of people out there today who want to discredit everything that you do.
Everything they are.
Don't be
Thank
surprised
you.
when they start.
Thank you.
I think there are a couple of sentences in this gratitude, the story of gratitude. I've read this 4 times. I just love this. But I think it takes it back to the first question. In this hour of deep bereavement, she was thinking only of loving service. Here was an affection so genuine that it had cast out all fear. Here was a thankfulness so lasting that it craved the sweet boon of service.
Beautiful.
Perfect.
Beautiful. Maybe a beautiful ending to this. Thank you. Yes. So when this goes up, you all should read this article by Tomlinson.
I'll put it together today and I'll be ready today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas. Good way to spend
Everybody
it.
have a blessed day.
Yes.
Yes,
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.